Ray. What do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
You're listening to The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity, Forces That Bring Riches to You, by Catherine Ponder. Copyright BN Publishing. Online at bnpublishing.com. The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity. Introduction. There's gold dust in the air for you. This book is the result of several recent recessions and many years of lean living. Nobody likes recessions and nobody likes lean living, and indeed nobody should like them. For 15 years I tried to find such a book as this one. During those years of searching the bookshelves, I found that there are many books which give various ideas, but in none of them did I find a set of compact, simple laws for assuring success. I began searching for a book such as this after having been widowed and left with a small son to rear and educate. Since I had no training for work and no means of income, I would have given anything to have known then about the power of prosperous thinking. For a while, I experienced depression, ill health, loneliness, financial lack, and a sense of complete failure. It seemed that the whole world was against me, and that everything I did went wrong. But with my son to provide for, I could not settle for failure. I had to succeed for his sake as well as for my own. Finally, when I was at my lowest ebb emotionally, physically, and financially, I learned about the power of thought as an instrument for success or failure. I came to realize that the right use of my mind could become the key to healthy, happy, prosperous, successful living. As soon as I grasped this wonderful success secret, the tide began to change. The birth of prosperous thinking. You've heard much in recent years about positive thinking. Out of the recessions and lean years, another term has been born, prosperous thinking. The word prosper means to flourish, succeed, thrive, to experience favorable results. You are prosperous to the degree that you are experiencing peace, health, and plenty in your world. While prosperous thinking means many things to people, basically it gives you the power to make your dreams come true. Whether those dreams are concerned with better health, increased financial success, a happier personal life, more education and travel, or a deeper spiritual life. This book plainly shows how prosperous thinking has helped people in every walk of life to experience these results. Furthermore, it shows how prosperous thinking can do these things for you, too. As you read this book, chapter by chapter, you will automatically begin to develop the power of prosperous thinking, and almost as easily, you will begin to reap a harvest of prosperous results. The salesman with the golden touch. Years ago, a salesman used the power of prosperous thinking, although he may not have consciously been aware of it. When people asked him, "How's business?" he always gave this standard answer: "Business is wonderful because there's gold dust in the air." For him, it seemed to certainly be so. Every contact became a sale. After a while, whenever his name was mentioned, people always said, yes, everything he touches turns to gold. The laws of prosperity. During my first year in the ministry, one of the most severe business recessions since World War II hit this country. Members of my congregation began asking for lectures on ways to survive this difficult period. It was then that these dynamic laws of prosperity began to take form, and with breathtaking rapidity, these ideas worked for all types of people. How the laws have worked for others. For instance, within a week after the first lecture, 2 secretaries had received increases in pay, one with a promotion and new title. A stockbroker soon reported that he had more business than he had dared hope for, although most of his fellow workers were comparatively idle. One client, whom he had not seen for several years, appeared and handed him a check to invest for $200,000. A month after beginning to deliberately invoke prosperous thinking, his income was 4 times its usual amount. A lawyer who had several industrial clients then on strike or out of work reported that the recession was suddenly over for him. His income zoomed upward into the $2,000 a month bracket, which at the time seemed a great increase, though later, after he established a definite pattern of prosperous thinking, it seemed only normal. A steel manufacturer's agent, whose business was affected by the recession, reported that he unexpectedly received an order amounting to $4,500, which he had not solicited. One woman was a sales lady in a department store which employed more than 100 people. All of her fellow workers had been thinking and talking hard times, At the end of the month, after this woman began to deliberately think prosperously, she was the only one in the store who received a commission check for having oversold her quota for the month. The other employees had decreed hard times and had gotten such results for themselves. The owner of an electrical business had an outstanding account of $750 owing his company. As he began to think of those owing him as prosperous, the account was quietly paid. A jeweler had an indebtedness owing him which he tried every means he knew to collect, including the use of unkind letters, all to no avail. When he, too, decided to think in prosperous terms about himself and the one owing him, to his amazement the creditor quickly paid up. One family that desired freedom from indebtedness suddenly inherited a nice sum of money. A government employee received a raise in pay that had been pending in Congress for several years. A telephone company employee also received a general raise that had been promised months earlier. A construction engineer received a new assignment to a $15.5 million construction job after having served on $1.5 million construction job. One couple even received an all-expense trip abroad. These are but a few examples of the power of prosperous thinking. Prosperity brings new look and new health. But more than financial returns appeared. As I weekly lectured on prosperous thinking, I began to realize that the people in attendance were beginning to blossom forth with a new look, a look of inner peace, poise, happiness, security, and stability not previously apparent. The failure look of depression and discouragement was replaced with a look of success, self-confidence, and inner happiness. The look of defeat was replaced with a look of dominion, authority, victory. It was wonderful to behold. New mental and physical health appeared for a number of people, too. One businessman had been told most of his life that he had a serious heart condition that would have to be pampered constantly. As he began to apply the power of prosperous thinking in every phase of his world, he relaxed more and more in mind and body. Tension, both conscious and unconscious, gradually eased. After a time, his doctor stated that his earlier heart trouble had vanished. Now, several years later, he remains healthier and happier than ever before. Several people with nervous conditions found new health, serenity, and peace of mind. A housewife in this group had for years visited a series of doctors who could find nothing organically wrong with her. As she began deliberately to practice prosperous thinking, she began to think more lovingly of others, including her husband. Her new attitude of appreciation gave him a feeling of approval he had not had from his wife in many a year. This, in turn, added to his self-confidence and was reflected as new success in his work. His new job success brought a happiness and satisfaction to their marriage that had long been missing. This woman's health improved so much that she soon appeared years younger, and her aches and pains faded as happiness came into the various departments of her life. Your whole outlook changes. A lonely, unhappy businesswoman who had often threatened suicide became so intensely interested in the laws of prosperity that she found interests outside herself. This led to a happier, more balanced life. The suicide talk stopped. A housewife and also a businessman whose secret drinking had become serious problems found new hope in their practice of prosperous thinking. They began to realize that their drinking problems could be overcome. As they gained this victorious expectation, they were able to begin resolving and dissolving inner hostilities and conflicts. Their drinking gradually diminished. Several marriages were saved after one or another of the marriage partners began to invoke these laws of prosperity. One person's divorced partner returned, and they were remarried. Several lonely, unmarried people were happily married, one after having been widowed for 20 years. A businessman who had always detested his work found, as he began using these ideas, that he got a whole new perspective on his job, and in due time he no longer disliked it. The salesman was right. That salesman was right. There is gold dust in the air. For you, for me, for everyone. The economists know this because they declare that we have now entered one of the richest eras the world has ever known, which they are describing as the golden 60s. The scientists know that there is gold dust in the air because they declare this universe to be composed of nothing but radiant substance or ether, to which man has unlimited access. Psychologists and metaphysicians know about the gold dust. They declare that man forms his world from the rich, unlimited substance within him and around him, through his thoughts, emotions, words, and actions. And so let us proceed in confidence, knowing that there is gold dust in the air, and that there is gold dust everywhere. As you begin reading this book, no matter what the conditions of your life may now be, do so in this attitude of mind. There is gold dust in the air for me. Through definite, deliberate, prosperous thinking, I now begin assimilating that gold dust, and even now I am beginning to experience gold dust results. Now proceed quickly to the following pages, where you will learn the exciting gold dust secrets of prosperity. Others.
Chapter 1.
Catherine
The
Ponder.
shocking truth about prosperity is that it is shockingly right instead of shockingly wrong for you to be prosperous. Russell H. Conwell emphasized this in his famous Acres of Diamonds lectures. I say you ought to be rich. You have no right to be poor. To live and not be rich is a misfortune, and it is doubly a misfortune because you could have been rich just as well as being poor. We ought to get rich, if we can, by honorable methods, and these are the only methods that sweep us quickly toward the goal of riches. Please note that the word rich means having an abundance of good or living a fuller, more satisfying life. Indeed, you are prosperous to the degree that you are experiencing peace, health, happiness, and plenty in your world. There are honorable methods that can carry you quickly towards that goal. It is easier to accomplish than you may now think. That, too, is the shocking truth about prosperity. Several decades ago, a businessman predicted that the religious leaders of the future would be forced to give more attention to helping their followers solve their economic and personal problems of the present, and that they would be less concerned with the dead past or unborn future. I agree with that businessman, and I wish to help you do just that. Solve your economic and personal problems of the present. As you do, your dead past and your unborn future will surely be taken care of. You should desire prosperity. Perhaps one of the greatest shocks I ever received was the one that became apparent when I began lecturing on prosperity. I soon realized that many of the people attending the lectures were still trying to resolve that old conflict of whether they should desire to be prosperous. Of course, they wanted prosperity, every normal person does, but they appeared to secretly wonder whether they should seek it or not, especially from a spiritual standpoint. Most of the business people attending the lecture seemed to feel guilty about wanting to be prosperous, though of course they were working hard every day in their jobs to do so. The question obviously was still in their minds, whether poverty was a spiritual virtue or a common vice. That conflict in their thinking was setting up a conflicting result in their affairs, which neutralized their efforts to succeed, no matter how hard they were working. Soon it became apparent that it would take the expression of some bold, even shocking ideas on the subject to blast out the limited beliefs that had bound these people to mediocre living for years. Realizing this, I spent several lecture periods explaining how God, man, and prosperity were all divinely related. After the initial shock of these ideas had passed, these fine people were greatly relieved and very happy that, at last, they no longer had to feel guilty about wanting to be prosperous. It was then that they began to experience the previously described results in rapid time. Since that time, in my lecturing around the country, in private counseling and correspondence on the subject with countless people, in radio, television, and newspaper interviews, I find that the same idea still persists. Perfectly wonderful people seem quite confused whether prosperity should be considered a spiritual blessing, but how relieved they are when shown that it definitely is. Poverty is a sin. And so again I say, it is shockingly right instead of shockingly wrong for you to be prosperous. Obviously, you cannot be very happy if you are poor, and you need not be poor. It is a sin. Poverty is a form of hell caused by man's blindness to God's unlimited good for him. Poverty is a dirty, uncomfortable, degrading experience. Poverty is actually a form of disease, and in its acute phases, it seems to be a form of insanity. Poverty fills prisons with thieves and murderers. It drives men and women to drink, prostitution, dope addiction, suicide. It drives potentially fine, talented, intelligent children to delinquency and crime. It makes people do things they otherwise would never dream of doing. Communism, one of the most dread movements in the world today, often gets a stronghold as a direct result of poverty. The governments which have become communist-dominated usually have done so for financial reasons, believing it is a way to financial security. The sinful results of poverty know no bounds. That is one of the reasons why, as a minister, I have felt so strongly led to do whatever I can to help people learn how to eradicate the sin of poverty from their lives. A doctor I know has said that he would have few patients if it were not for financial problems, which cause them worry, strain, and tension, all of which lead to ill health. He states that our mental hospitals are filled with people who have found that financial strain over a long period impaired their minds and bodies to the point of incapacity. It has even been estimated that 9/10 of mankind's ills are caused by the strain, misery, and unhappiness of poverty. Let us be done with thinking of poverty as a virtue. It is a common vice. If you have been living in financial lack and limitation, you have literally been living in vice. That, too, is the shocking truth about prosperity. But you need not continue living in financial vice. There is a way out. Prosperity is your divine heritage. The Bible is filled with rich promises regarding your potential prosperity as a child of God. You should be prosperous, well supplied, and have an abundance of good, because it is your divine heritage. Your Creator wants you that way. That is the shockingly nice truth about prosperity. Besides, you can't be much good to yourself or to anyone else unless you are prosperous. The person who does not desire to be prosperous is abnormal, because without prosperity, you live abnormally. You cannot live fully on the physical plane without proper food, comfortable clothing, warm shelter, and without freedom from excessive toil. Rest and recreation are also needed for your physical life. You cannot live fully on the mental plane without satisfying creative mental activity. Without books and time to enjoy them, without time to enjoy music, art, and other cultural interests, without opportunity and money for travel and intellectual association with others of similar interests. To live fully on the spiritual plane of life, you need time for quiet contemplation, for meditation, prayer, spiritual study, attendance at churches, lectures, and satisfying association with others on the spiritual path. It is therefore of supreme importance that you be prosperous for your physical, mental, and spiritual welfare and development. Make no excuses for putting up with lack or accepting it as a permanent arrangement in your life. Do not go to the other extreme either and talk of wanting to be prosperous for the good you can do. That is secondary. You want to be prosperous mainly because it is right that you should be. Prosperity is your divine heritage as the child of a king, as a son of God. Success is divinely ordained. There is no reason for you to think of prosperity as something separate from your spiritual life or beyond the pale of religion. You do not have to try to live in two worlds where you run things for 6 days and then on the 7th give God a chance to show what He can do. Take God as a rich, loving, understanding Father into all your affairs each day of your week. Ask His divine instruction and guidance about all your affairs, financial and otherwise, and you will be pleasantly surprised how much better every phase of your life will become. An analyst recently declared to me that he had found the most common cause of failure in people is the conflicting idea about whether success is divinely ordained or divinely damned. For instance, he stated that many had assured him that failure was more spiritually approved than success, since riches are regarded as an object of worship or as a false god. This doctor further stated that he has spent many an hour explaining to people who are not succeeding that being success-minded is not serving a false god, and that they should stop using God as an excuse for their failures. When you realize that God wants you to be prosperous, and that God, as the creator of this rich universe, is indeed the source of your prosperity, then you are not worshiping riches. You are not making prosperity a false god. You are simply claiming your prosperous heritage from the source of all your blessings. The Lord pointed out the right spiritual attitude toward prosperity when He told Moses to remind the children of Israel, "But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is He that hath given thee power to get wealth." The word wealth means grand living, and that is what a prosperous thinker should be working toward and should be expecting as his spiritual right. Perhaps you are recalling at this point a statement I also heard as a child which confused me about prosperity being a spiritual blessing. People often said, "I am poor, but I'm a good Christian." Even though I come from a family that has produced several ministers, I always shuddered when I heard that statement. My immediate reaction was, why should Christians or any other group have to be poor? God isn't poor, and He is our loving Father. Then, too, that statement made it sound as if all the rich folks were bound for hell. Somehow I could not figure out why rich people had to go to hell just because they were prosperous. It seemed rather inconsistent to me. The Bible is a prosperity textbook. Upon entering the ministry, I decided to settle the issue with my own mind by studying the biblical view of prosperity versus poverty. It was a pleasant surprise to discover that the Bible is the greatest textbook on prosperity ever written. The Bible clearly shows that you have not been pleasing God by settling for lack and limitation in your life, any more that you have been pleasing yourself. The very first chapter describes the rich universe created for man. The last book of the Bible symbolically describes heaven in rich terms. Most of the great men of the Bible were either born prosperous, became prosperous, or had access to riches whenever the need arose. Among them were Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David, Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Nehemiah, Elijah, and Elisha. Why poverty is not spiritual. You may wonder why there has been so much talk of sacrifice, persecution, and hard times as necessary phases of the spiritual way of life. History reveals that the inspired yet practical teachings of the Bible continued to be observed during the early centuries, but soon religion became more secularized, leading to variations and departures from the original teachings. Later, the feudal system during the Middle Ages assured wealth only for the privileged few. During this period, the teachings of poverty and penance was offered to the masses as the only way to salvation in order to keep people in poverty and to make lack and privation a supposed Christian virtue. Unsuspecting millions were led to believe that it was pious to be poor, a belief which was useful in forestalling revolution among the masses. Some of those old feudal ideas about poverty as a spiritual virtue have persisted until today, but they are false, man-made ideas and not God's rich truth for you and me. Thus, make no further excuses to yourself or others for wanting to be prosperous. It is a divine desire that should be given divine expression. You can boldly give thanks that prosperity is your divine heritage, and that the Father's desire for you is unlimited good, not merely the means of a meager existence. Right attitudes will pay your bills. Now, in order to help you establish the all-important prosperous attitude that God is the source of man's supply as the creator of this rich universe, and that God's will for you is therefore the wealth of the universe, I suggest that you paraphrase the words of the Lord to Moses. I will remember the Lord God, for He it is that giveth me power to experience wealth. Perhaps you are thinking, yes, but is this kind of thinking practical? Can such attitudes actually help put shoes on the baby, food on the table, and pay the rent? Yes, it can. Recently, I talked with a young woman who seemed to have everything against her. When stricken with paralysis, her drinking, gambling, non-working husband deserted her, leaving several children to support and educate. Though she had a roof over her head, it was mortgaged. Though her husband was required by court order to provide a small monthly allowance for support of the children, it was insufficient to meet their needs. However, each time that I visited this woman, who for many months was bedridden and more recently confined to a wheelchair, she always joyously reported new channels of supply which had opened to her. On one visit, she stated that she had been given enough canned food to last several months, that money had appeared as needed for clothes for her children from some relatives in a distant state, that her own medical expenses were being met by a friend who was overseas, that indeed every financial need was being met. Fresh paint had even arrived for the outside of the house, and a neighbor was busily repainting it. When I asked what her prosperity secret was and how she had been able to meet every bill on time while she was in a wheelchair with no ample or steady income, she said that one prayer had been her great source of strength and supply. Whenever a financial need was near, she would quietly meditate over and over upon this promise from the 46th Psalm. Be still and know that I am God. One day the mortgage payment was due on the house in the amount of $40. She had not a cent of the money, so she quietly began to think on these words. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God at work in this situation now. Around noon, she got a sense of peace about the situation and so completed her meditation period. About an hour later, as she was being served lunch by a relative, In walked a neighbor who placed some money in her hand. He said, "Our Sunday school class got to thinking about you, and there was some extra money in the treasury, and we decided we would like to share it with you." The amount he handed her was $40. This woman, recognizing God as the source of her supply, has proved that this source will never fail her, even under extreme conditions of ill health, marital disappointment, and financial uncertainty. Of course, her great desire is to become self-supporting and financially independent of gifts from relatives, neighbors, and friends. Surely she will realize this desire as she perseveres in prosperous thinking. She is now beginning to walk again for the first time in several years and will soon be able to work, too. Meanwhile, she is proving that God's rich supply can come in several unforeseen ways to meet the needs of the moment, regardless of life's hard conditions. The psalmist was recognizing God as the source of his supply when he declared, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." It is a good prosperity prayer to declare often. A housewife needed $100 to cover 2 bills that were due by the end of the week. Early that week, whenever fear tried to creep in as to how she would pay those bills, she declared over and over, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." On Friday morning, the day the bills were due, a check arrived in the mail for $110. It was from a company her husband had worked for several years previously. They wrote a letter saying they had just found in her husband's account that this amount was still due him, and that they were enclosing it to clear his records with them. A businessman with a large family was getting toward the end of the month financially. He was paid once a month, and it was still a week until payday. The groceries were getting low. His wife reminded him of these facts on Friday before Saturday morning grocery shopping time. Together they agreed to look to God for their supply and to affirm guidance. They did so by constantly affirming, "Our sufficiency is of God." Saturday morning, the mail arrived with a check from the State Revenue Department enclosing an income tax refund in the amount of $60. This couple was expecting several $100s in federal income tax refund, but had forgotten about a possible state tax refund. The amount covered their needs nicely until payday. A saleswoman who had a lot of financial expense and whose sales had fallen off decided to look to God as the source of her supply by affirming over and over from the Lord's Prayer, "Give me this day my daily bread." It was like a landslide. Her sales picked up tremendously so that the commission checks started coming in again, plus her salary. Neighbors brought her prepared dishes of food as a token of their esteem for her. She was given several lovely items of new clothing by a friend. Some of her customers brought her gifts in appreciation for her loving service to them. A number of invitations into friends' homes for dinner were extended, which she enjoyed. Daily, her needs began to be supplied, as she had prayed they would be. Her daily bread appeared in many satisfying forms. How to stabilize your finances. Of course, the wonderful thing about recognizing God as the source of all riches and taking him into your financial affairs and into every department in your life is that the more you do, the more stabilized every phase of your life becomes. In due time, there are no stringent financial emergencies to be dramatically met with instant manna from heaven. Instead, things just get better and better financially, so that there is always substance on hand to meet your needs. The psalmist pointed out what happens when you consistently think of God as the source of your supply. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on this law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the streams of water, that bringeth forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also doth not wither, and that whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. But it is good to know that until you develop a proper understanding to bring forth the substance of the universe in an abundant, unbroken stream of supply, the financial needs of the moment can be met by looking to the source of all riches, a rich heavenly Father, the link between thought and supply. Perhaps you are thinking, if my prosperity comes basically from God, if he is the source of my supply, then why all the talk about prosperous thinking? What does prosperous thinking have to do with my supply? God's rich supply is all around you universally, as well as innately within you, as talents and abilities and ideas longing for expression. But that rich supply and substance must be contacted and used. Your mind is your connecting link with it. Your attitudes, your mental concepts, beliefs, and outlook are your connecting link with God's rich substance and your access to it. God can only do for you what he can do through you by means of your thoughts and ideas, which lead to your reactions. Thus, prosperous thinking opens the way to prosperous results. Begin by making contact with the rich, universal substance around you and with the rich substance within you by declaring often, I stir up the gifts of God within me and around me, and I am blessed on every hand with happiness, success, and true achievement. Just by declaring this idea, you will begin stirring up the riches of the universe, attracting them to you and expressing them through you. Success adores the prosperous attitude. Another of the shocking truths about prosperity is that thoughts of your mind have made you what you are, and thoughts of your mind will make you whatever you become from this day forward. The more you realize this, the more you will come to know that people, places, conditions, and events cannot keep your God-given prosperity and success from you. Once you decide to deliberately employ prosperous thinking as your ally for success. Indeed, you will discover that the things, people, and events that have previously worked against you will either begin to work for you and with you, or they will fade out of your life, and new people and events will appear to help you succeed. That is the power of prosperous thinking. Some authorities believe that one prosperous thought is more powerful than 1,000 failure thoughts, and that 2 prosperous attitudes steadily held and expressed are more powerful than 10,000 failure attitudes. Success adores the prosperous attitude. Of that you can be sure. A loving father seems to adore the prosperous attitude too. Surely others adore it and are attracted to it and work for it. More about these things in the next chapter. Meanwhile, remind yourself often that God is the source of your supply, and then make spiritual contact with Him, His rich substance and rich ideas that await your appropriation. I am the rich child of a loving Father. I now accept and claim His rich good for me in every phase of my life. My own God-given success in the form of rich ideas and rich results now appears. Remind yourself often of these shocking truths about prosperity, that it is shockingly right instead of shockingly wrong to be prosperous, that God created a rich universe for you and wants you to enjoy it, that prosperity can come quickly through your deliberate use of prosperous thinking, which leads to the expression of rich ideas, rich actions, and rich results. Thus, dare to ask a friendly, interested, rich, loving Father for guidance often. And with Moses, remember the Lord God, for He it is that giveth thee power to get wealth. Now launch forth happily and expectantly into the dynamic laws of prosperity, the spiritual and mental laws which can and will transform your life. Solomon realized the need for exploring them when he explained, Poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction. You can, from this page forward, begin freeing yourself of limitation, lack, and failure. As you accept and use the simple but powerful ideas given in this chapter and in the pages to come, you will find yourself on the royal road to success. Furthermore, you will find it a pleasant experience that produces satisfying results. That is the power of prosperous thinking, and that is the shockingly nice truth about it.
The Basic Law of Prosperity, Chapter 2. I learned the basic law of prosperity the hard way. I have been earning the right to tell you about it for a long time. 15 years ago, life looked hopeless for me. Widowed and with an infant son, I had no training for any type of work, and therefore no means of income. My family during that period was not able to offer much financial assistance. If you could have seen me then, you would have doubtlessly have said, prosperous thinking or no prosperous thinking, there goes a hopeless case. It was during this miserable period that I learned about the power of our thinking as an instrument for success or failure. It soon became plain to me that my previous failures were due largely to my previous failure thinking. But that same power of thought, when rightly directed, could be the key to healthy, happy, successful living. What a realization it was on the day I read the words of Solomon, As a man thinketh within himself, so is he. And later the words of Job, Thou shalt decree a thing, and it shall be established unto thee, and light shall shine upon thy way. From the philosopher James Allen I learned, through his thoughts, man holds the key to every situation and contains within himself that transforming and regenerative agency by which he may make himself what he wills. Then I excitedly surmised that my potential wealth, health, and happiness were actually within me, waiting to be radiated outward into my world as healthy, wealthy, happy thoughts, feelings, expectations, and decrees, which in turn would attract like results into my life. As soon as I grasped the simple but all-powerful success secret and began applying it, the tide changed and my ships began to come in. The way soon opened for me to literally work my way through business school. I thereafter became secretary to Joe Talley, a young lawyer who became mayor of our town, a candidate for Congress, and who later expanded the Talley law firm to include several attorneys and secretaries who served a number of prosperous clients. More recently, Mr. Talley has served as president of Kiwanis International. At the height of my work with this attorney, I felt led to go into the ministry so that I might help others to realize and apply the spiritual and mental keys to healthy, happy, prosperous living that had meant so much to me. Upon thinking back, I now realize that consciously and unconsciously, I invoked the basic prosperity law of radiation and attraction every step of the way. Recently, on meeting old friends whom I had not seen for many years, they exclaimed in astonishment, "Catherine, what has happened to you? You seem so different from the very serious, unsure, unhappy person we once knew. You now seem so happy and radiant, even victorious. Tell us your secret. How did you get that way?" I then explained to them the basic law of life that is discussed in this chapter and throughout this book. It is because of my own personal use of this basic law that I feel so strongly about it and emphatically believe that it can work for you even in greater ways than it has for me. A number of people who have attended my prosperity lectures have used it with astounding success. The law of laws. Truly, the laws that govern prosperity are just as sure and work as the laws that govern mathematics, music, physics, and other sciences. The Bible describes that basic law of prosperity when it speaks of sowing and reaping, or giving and receiving. The scientists describe it as action and reaction. By some, it has been termed the law of supply and demand. Emerson described it as the law of compensation, whereby like attracts like. He declared that the law of compensation is the law of laws. You cannot get something for nothing. I agree with Emerson that it is time the law of compensation was emphasized as life's basic law. I like to think of this basic law of prosperity as radiation and attraction, that what you radiate outward in your thoughts, feelings, mental pictures, and words, you attract into your life and affairs. But you cannot get something for nothing. The reason why there is still poverty in this universe of lavish abundance is that many people still do not understand this basic law of life. They do not yet realize that they must radiate in order to attract, and that what they do radiate, they constantly attract. Most people today still have to learn that they cannot get something for nothing, but must give before receiving, or must sow before reaping. When they do not give or sow in terms of prosperity, they make no contact with God's lavish abundance, and so there is no channel formed through which the rich, unlimited substance of the universe can pour forth its riches to them. The truth of this was recently brought to my attention when I had contact with some people in a poverty-stricken area. I soon discovered that these people only wanted a handout. They were not interested in invoking the basic law of prosperity by giving or sowing first. Instead, they were trying to get something for nothing, which simply cannot be done. Thus, they continued to live in poverty. You can always give something. Perhaps you are thinking, what could such a person give when he seems so in lack? There is always something a person can give, either tangibly or intangibly, that will put him in touch with God's rich supply. A widow with a house full of children once telephoned a counselor. She had no money or food for her children. It was lunchtime and her children had not eaten since the day before. She was desperate. The counselor who took the call knew well what it was like to find oneself in such a predicament. She had learned that the power of prosperous thinking could literally supply manna from heaven at a financially desperate period in her own life. With great compassion, she explained the magic power of giving in some way which would start the substance flowing back in appropriate form. Of course, when she explained that the widow must give in order to receive, the widow's first reaction was much the same that yours or mine might be the first time we were told we must give to receive. She lamented, "That's just it. I have nothing to give." To which the counselor gently replied, "My dear, of course you have something to give. We always have something to give. Indeed, we always have more to give than we at first realize. She then urged this frantic widow to look about her and to ask for divine guidance concerning what she should give. The widow was assured that this counselor would be praying with her in the faith that she would be divinely led as to how to give and how to receive thereafter. This counselor also told her that after starting the flow of substance by giving, she was then to get ready to receive by preparing her table for that meal she so wished for her children, and by preparing her grocery list with which to shop, in the assurance that the money would manifest very soon for those groceries. In faith, the widow sat down and prayerfully asked what she had that she could give. Suddenly she remembered flowers growing in her yard, which she happily cut and gave to a sick neighbor who seemed overjoyed to receive them. Next, she prepared her table with the best china, silver, and linens in the house. This caused pleasure and excitement among her children, who then expectantly awaited a good meal. Just as she was completing her grocery list, someone who had been owing her money for a long time dropped by and paid her $30 on their debt. $30 which she had long since given up ever getting back. If I could shout only one message to the whole world regarding life's secrets, it would be this: that you cannot get something for nothing, but that you can have the best of everything when you give full measure for the good wish to receive. Since I have been writing about prosperity, I have received a number of letters from people who do not yet understand this law and who are still trying to get something for nothing. One woman asked that $30,000 be sent to her immediately to pay off old debts. She didn't write once or twice, but 3 times before she was convinced she must use this basic law of prosperity and bring in her own supply. Radiate and you will attract. Emerson might have been describing this law of giving and receiving, or radiation and attraction, when he wrote, "Great hearts send forth steadily the secret forces that incessantly draw great events." And who are the great hearts? Those people who dare to think and radiate great thoughts and expectancies of success and prosperity instead of failure, trouble, and limitation. There's nothing great, unusual, or praiseworthy about failure, trouble, and limitation. Anyone can experience those things by following the line of least resistance and by entertaining the usual failure thoughts that one constantly hears every day. How often one hears the complaint, "Everything happens to me. I just can't win for losing. This is a tough world. The other fellow gets the breaks." This beginning usually leads into a conversation filled with unpleasant experiences of the day, criticism of jobs, co-workers, families, the governments, world leaders, war, crime, disease, and hard times, hard times, hard times. Each of us constantly use the law of radiation and attraction, whether we are aware of it or not. But if you wish to enjoy more prosperity and success in life, you have to consciously, boldly, and deliberately take hold of your thoughts and feelings and redirect them towards prosperity and success. It is up to you to dare to choose and radiate outward through your thinking what you really wish to experience in life, rather than to get bogged down in unpleasant or failure experiences of the moment. These conditions can change as quickly as you change your thinking about them. A friend in the public relations business recently used the law of radiation and attraction with successful results. For some time, he had desired a certain out-of-state account and had made every reasonable effort to obtain it. Finally, he decided that he would definitely entertain and mentally radiate the desire for that account strongly, deliberately, and boldly, feeling that surely, in due time, he would receive that account or a bigger one. He quietly sat down and thought about that account as though he were already handling it. He went over that account in his mind and thought of all the ways he would attempt to serve that client's best interest if he were handling their public relations. He thought about the account and the people involved for a long time and in great detail. He also declared over and over for a time, "I am not discouraged. I am persistent. I go forward. I am determined to achieve success in God's own wonderful way for me." When a sense of peace came over him, he dismissed the matter from his mind. A few weeks later, he attended a convention in which a number of his clients were involved. While swimming with several of them in a motel pool, he casually met the man whom he had been trying for months to meet and who had charge of that out-of-state account. Right there in the pool, they negotiated. When he joyously related his experience to me, he declared it was doubtless that prosperity law of radiation and attraction that brought the happy results. I have observed in talking with hundreds of people who have gone from failure to success that it is what we really think deep within ourselves most of the time, rather than the big front we may put up to others, that unconsciously attracts like results to us. There is an age-old maxim that says, "We are where we are because we are what we are, and we are what we are because of our habitual thinking." Many people work hard to attract greater good in superficial ways without first habitually radiating its mental equivalent, and that they are sorely disappointed when their great efforts result in failure and disappointment. Once when I was talking with a lady who felt she would like to be married, I suggest that she invoke the law of radiation and attraction. After explaining that she must radiate before she could attract, I suggested that she prayerfully radiate these ideas over and over. Divine love expressing through me now draws to me all that is needed to make me happy and my life complete. A little later, I began receiving reports from mutual friends that she was working hard on the attracting angle, but was radiating nothing more than telephone calls and obvious invitations to all the men of her acquaintance. Later, she returned and reported that the suggested prayer method had not worked. Gently, I reminded her that she had not radiated the prayer method suggested, but had radiated the scare method, which had not been suggested. The method had worked in reverse because she had reversed the process. A middle-aged widow more recently dared to try the radiation and attraction method for the same purpose. While floating in a swimming pool, she silently affirmed over and over, "Divine love expressing through me now draws to me all that is needed to make me happy and my life complete." Presently, she heard a man's voice calling to her from the side of the pool, inquiring about the water, which she assured him was wonderful. Soon he was in the water, and a little later he was in her life as her husband. Mental preparation comes first. What a thrill it is to realize that all things can be accomplished within the mind first, that your mind is your divine power for good. The reason all things can be accomplished mentally first is that the mind is the connecting link between the formed and unformed world. It's up to you in this wonderful age to claim your spiritual dominion of great good over everything, and to dare to subdue, change, or reform your world as you wish. Of course, you have been given all of this power to produce good and only good. Man's difficulties come when he uses his power in reverse. But what a sense of freedom it gives you to realize that whatever you center your attention upon steadily, constantly, and deliberately in your thoughts, feelings, and expectancies forms the expectancies of your life. When you realize this, life becomes easier, simpler, and more richly satisfying. You then no longer feel that you have to argue, beg, reason, plead, or appeal to anyone for your desired good. Instead, you quietly go to work in your thinking to mentally choose, mentally accept, and mentally radiate what you wish to experience in life. It gives you a victorious feeling even before the rich results begin to pour in. Be deliberate about wealth. You've got to radiate deliberately in order to attract the good you desire. Otherwise, you get into a limited trend of thought and produce limited results. What you do radiate or deliberately entertain mentally, you constantly attract. It may not appear that this law works in this exact way when you look at people who seem to be succeeding who apparently do not deserve it. But in due season, their health, wealth, and happiness crumble if it is not supported by a firm foundation of right thought and feeling. It is just a matter of the mills of the gods grinding slowly. Instead of fretting about whether the law of radiation and attraction is working rightly in the lives of others, proceed quietly to prove the laws of prosperous thinking for yourself. A stockbroker whose business associates were watching the market reports and declaring how slow things were, slipped into a private office and quietly relaxed. As he did so, he began to radiate this thought: everything and everybody prospers me now. Suddenly, the telephone began to ring and ring. Within a short time, he had received more business by telephone than he had received through any channel in several days. A watch repairman's business was slow. As he boarded an early morning bus, he, too, remembered the prosperity law of radiation and attraction and began to silently declare, everything and everybody prospers me now. For the next few days, he had many new customers come into his store to have watches and jewelry repaired. Soon he had received enough repair work to keep him busy for many weeks. You are magnetic. Each of us is a magnet, and as a magnet, you do not have to force success and prosperity to yourself. Instead, you can develop that exalted, expectant, prosperous state of mind that is a magnet for all good things of the universe to hasten to you, rather than entertaining the tense, critical, anxious, depressed, unforgiving, possessive state of mind that is a magnet for all kinds of trouble and failure. Since you have the tangible and intangible equivalent of whatever you dare to choose, mentally entertain and radiate, stop thinking of things as apart from or outside yourself. Stop thinking that people, things, circumstances, and conditions have power to hurt or harm you. Start realizing that nothing can stand between you and that good that you dare to choose mentally and radiate outward through your thoughts, feelings, words, and expectancies. Choose and radiate mentally. Choose and radiate emotionally. Choose and radiate constantly and persistently. A woman recently told me that since she had been invoking the power of prosperous thinking deliberately, everyone in her family had received wonderful blessings. Her husband had received several raises in pay. Her brother has become president of his company. 2 sisters have retired with handsome incomes. Another sister has become the first woman ever to hold a certain type of executive position for her company. Another brother had received a managerial position. A little leaven has leavened the whole loaf in that family. Outer steps will come easily. Of course, I do not mean to imply through all these people's experiences that you simply entertain and radiate the mental equivalent of the good desired and then do nothing more. Often you have to take definite external steps as well. But you will discover that by working out the mental concept of the desired good first, the outer steps will then unfold easily, almost automatically at times, without strained effort on your part. The more you turn your mind in rich directions, the less you seem to have to exert undue human effort to produce results. Work you will, but it will be work as satisfying self-expression rather than work just to survive. Your rich mind power and radiations seem to have a way of going forth and producing right opportunities, events, and circumstances for prosperity and success, so that you almost unconsciously walk into them. Release your pent-up substance. We are all filled with pent-up substance, energy, and divine ability, which wishes to work for us, through us, and around about us. Psychologists declare that the average person uses only about 10% of his mind power. Medical authorities claim that the average person only uses about 25% of his physical power. Psychologists further state that man can release more result-getting power in 1 hour of concentrated use of his mind than in 24 hours of physical work. Some psychologists even believe that man can release more result-getting power through 1 hour of concentrated thought than through a month of physical work. Surely there is great power within and around each of us for our use. You can release this pent-up substance, energy, and power within you for prosperous living through releasing deliberate thoughts, feelings, and mental pictures of success, prosperity, and riches. As you do so, your rich thoughts, feelings, and mental pictures are radiated outward into the rich, powerful ethers of this universe, where they make contact with the rich, universal substance. This rich universal substance is filled with divine intelligence and power that then moves among and works through people, conditions, and opportunities to attract that which corresponds with the rich radiations that you have sent forth, and the prosperous results then appear. Indeed, this wonderful universe is rich and friendly to everyone. It wishes all mankind to be prosperous, well, and happy, and for the affairs of man and the world to be in divine order. At this point, however, don't be too concerned about the theory of radiation and attraction. Just begin accepting it and using it as a prosperity secret. All of the prosperity laws stated throughout this book are but various ways of invoking the basic law of radiation and attraction. You will find your use of them a delightful, exciting, fascinating, and richly rewarding process. I now invite you to begin soaring through the pages of this book, reminding yourself these truths. I am an irresistible magnet with the power to attract unto myself everything that I divinely desire, according to the thoughts, feelings, and mental pictures I constantly entertain and radiate. I am the center of my universe. I have the power to create whatever I wish. I attract whatever I radiate. I attract whatever I mentally choose and accept. I begin choosing and mentally accepting the highest and best in life. I now choose and accept health, success, and happiness. I now choose lavish abundance for myself and for all mankind. This is a rich, friendly universe, and I dare to accept its riches, its hospitality, and to enjoy them now. The Vacuum Law of Prosperity, Chapter 3. You have heard it said that nature abhors a vacuum. It is particularly true in the realm of prosperity. The vacuum law of prosperity is one of the most powerful, though it takes bold, daring faith to set it into operation, as well as a sense of adventure and expectation to reap its full benefits. When a person is honestly trying to be prosperous, is thinking along prosperous lines, and still fails, it is usually because he needs to invoke the vacuum law of prosperity. Basically, the vacuum law of prosperity is this. If you want great good, greater prosperity in your life, start forming a vacuum to receive it. In other words, get rid of what you don't want to make room for what you do want. If there are clothes in the closet or furniture in your home or office that no longer seem right for you, if there are people among your acquaintances and friends that no longer seem congenial, begin moving the tangible and intangibles out of your life, in the faith that you can have what you really want and desire. Often it is difficult to know what you do want until you get rid of what you do not want. Let go of the lesser. Inevitably, in your life experiences, you will find that when the good you wish has not appeared, it is usually because you need to release and let go of something to make room for it. New substances do not flow easily into a cluttered situation. If you want greater good in your life, what are you letting go of or getting rid of to make room for it? Nature does abhor a vacuum, and when you begin moving out of your life what you do not want, you automatically are making way for what you do want. By letting go of the lesser, you automatically make room for your greater good to come in. Recently, a couple used this vacuum law of prosperity in furnishing their new home. From their former home, they brought only the furniture they really liked and felt appropriate for the new atmosphere. They fearlessly gave away a great deal of their old furniture and simply left bare spaces in their new home. Visualizing those spaces filled with the kind of furniture they definitely wanted. For a while, nothing seemed to happen, but they remained steadfast to their vision of beautiful, appropriate new furniture. Then one day, the husband, who worked for a large company, was placed on a merit point system. As he produced certain prosperous results for his company, his points of merit increased. These points could be applied toward a number of tangible rewards, one of which was furniture. A businessman had been trying for a number of months to sell his home because he was being transferred to another state. He heard about the vacuum law of prosperity and realized that though he had earnestly desired to sell his home for a number of months, he had done nothing to form a vacuum of any kind through which his desired good could begin manifesting. And so he sat down quietly in his study one day and mentally pictured each room of the house as empty, just as it would look after the house had been sold and he had moved out. He visualized a vacuum of emptiness everywhere. He then made notes concerning the furniture mover he desired to handle the moving and mentally worked out all the detailed plans of the move, just as though the house was already sold. Within a few days, a buyer appeared who liked everything about the house and gave him a check for the thousands of dollars equity, as well as for the down payment involved. Form a vacuum for health. Whenever you dare to form a vacuum, the substance of the universe then rushes in to fill that empty space. This applies on the spiritual, mental, and physical planes of life. A businessman got very sick for weeks and was under his physician's care. Every possible thing was done for him medically by his doctor, a very fine physician. But it all seemed to no avail. This man just got weaker and weaker. It seemed that his body was filled with poison, and nothing seemed to dissolve it. Finally, one night, perspiring from a high fever and deep cough, this man finally remembered the vacuum law and realized that there must be something he needed to release. Since he knew that the mind and emotions have such a powerful effect on the body, perhaps there was some mental attitude or emotional feeling that had to go to help eradicate his pain, fever, and weakness. He became very quiet and silently asked divine intelligence to reveal to him what he needed to release. Suddenly, he began to think of a